this video is going to look at diet as a biological treatment for crime. Again, just remember that diet isn't going to be listed in the question, so it's not going to say evaluate the usefulness of changing offenders' diet in the treatment of criminal behaviour. It's just going to talk to you about the biological treatment, and you need to remember that the one that we've chosen to study is diet. Now, diet is actually a lesser used approach in treating offenders relating to biological interventions. And obviously the reason for these interventions being used less is because there isn't a great deal of research evidence to support the effectiveness of them. Now, diet is only one of a biological treatment option for aggression. There are lots of others, including hormonal changes, medication, etc. But diet itself is the suggestion that minerals, vitamins, or essential fatty acids can play a critical role within human behaviour, and actually having a deficit in any of these areas can increase the potential for an individual to act in a particularly violent manner. Now, low blood sugar levels have also been noted to result in increased irritability, and although the evidence is often confounded by other variables such as drug-taking behaviour or a lack of clarity as to the type of antisocial behaviour, researchers are actually determining the correlation between sugar levels and aggression itself. Now, when looking at the effect of diet on behaviour, it's necessary to consider how diet can affect the hormones within the body and how this itself can actually influence the behaviour rather than the diet itself having a direct effect. There are many other variables that can contribute to violence which are not accounted for by diet. Now, Benton, which we're going to talk about later, actually identified provocation and social skills as two that were excluded from consideration within this treatment approach, but others can include the influence of other people, previous experiences, and the individual's interpretation of the situation. Now, in terms of evaluating the usefulness of diet, it's worth remembering that the research suggested it's actually all correlational. Again, we're not able to provide cause and effect relationships here because we don't have information about what offenders' diet was like before they committed an offence and therefore what it was like afterwards and the direct influence that that diet had. The research that we've got here is correlational, so this idea of relationships between people with potentially low blood sugar levels, people with lacks of minerals and fatty acids within their diet, and then the relationship of those influences in terms of committing crime. Therefore, we can't control or exclude extraneous variables when we're talking about the results here. So, for example, what I mean by that is it necessarily the diet that somebody's on that's leading to criminal behaviour, or is it social factors? Is it where they went to school? Is it the socioeconomic background that they had? And because we can't exclude these extraneous variables, we're never really able to say exactly what the influence leading to the criminal behaviour was. It's also necessary, as I just mentioned, to consider how the diet is affecting the hormones, and therefore, is it the diet that's the treatment itself, and is it the diet that's the problem in the first place, or is it how the diet affects the hormones, and therefore it's these hormonal changes that are actually correcting or changing the behaviour. However, diet is easily implemented, and it's not particularly costly. Now, diet is something that can be quite easily controlled again within a prison setting. The only thing that's particularly costly with this is the idea of the dietitian in the first place doing a full analysis of the patient's blood work in order to be able to see whether there is low blood sugar levels, whether there is a deficiency of these minerals, vitamins and fatty acids, because it's this dietitian that will basically be able to inform the programme moving forward for the offender, because they are the ones that are able to see if there's a problem there in the first place. Now, obviously, this use of the dietitian, particularly doing an individual workup for each offender, that can be quite costly within this process. Now, some evidence for this. So, Gesh explains that the human brain, like any other part of the body, requires adequate nourishment to function normally. And although the brain only makes up 2% of our body mass, it actually uses a fifth of all our available energy. And obviously, to do this, it needs to use our available nutrients. Now, if we're not obtaining enough of these from our diet, then it's very difficult for the brain's neurotransmitters to carry on regulating. So, as a result, things like serotonin are potentially effective. Now, if this serotonin is effective, then this might, for example, influence the choices that we make and therefore how we're behaving without us actually knowing that that's what's influencing the behaviour. So, Gesh researched the influence of these supplementary vitamins, minerals and fatty acids on the antisocial behaviour of young adult prisoners. And they actually found that 35% fewer disciplinary incidents were committed by these prisoners who were taking these vitamin supplements compared to prisoners who were taking a placebo. Remembering that a placebo is actually an empty drug, so a drug that kind of gives you the psychological effect of taking medication without actually making any physiological changes to the body. Antisocial behaviour in prisons, including violence, can therefore be reduced by these food supplements, with similar implications for those having poor diets within the community. Now, it's a nice recent piece of research from Gesh here supporting that a quick change within diet can have a really positive effect in terms of the behaviour of the offenders. So low blood sugar has also been linked to irritability. Now, Benton found that moderate falls in blood sugar levels within Peruvian children has led to an increase in irritability when playing frustrating computer games. So again, it's evidence for the impact of this low blood sugar levels and therefore leading to aggressive behaviour. It's worth noting it has been an 8 marker previously. This has on 2017's paper. Now you can see here it's only obviously a very limited set of answers from the mark scheme, but you can see here that in terms of the AO1, what's important here is that you're focusing on how diet can be used as a treatment. Now if you're going on about how diet can be an explanation of crime, you're not going to be awarded the marks within this question. It's important that you're talking about how we can analyse the diet and how we can implement changes within that diet and how therefore that can be used as a treatment. So for example, this use of multivitamins being added to an offender's diet in order to counteract these deficiencies within these vitamins, minerals and fatty acids. Now again, AO3 you can see here really strong on evidence. So Gesh and Benton that we've just mentioned are already there. They've also given you an additional one here of Zalberg, who found that adding magnesium, vitamin D and omega-3 to young offenders' diets decreased the violent events by 34%, wherefore they actually increased in a control group. But don't forget as well, you can use the evaluation points that we talked about previously. So in terms of correlational research, not getting cause and effect, not controlling extraneous variables, but also being quite a cheap and easy way to implement across a wider scale.